Hi folks, this is Karim Raouf from IT Visualizer channel. Today we will continue our lab, the DC Comics lab. This is the second video. Okay, this is the second video in our first, this is the second video in the playlist or the lab, what is called DC Comics lab. In the previous video we have been discussing that we are now in the DC Comics Heroes universe, okay, or our lab is concentrating on the DC Comics characters, villains and heroes, okay. Our lab scenario, as I said before in the previous video, in the CD Comics universe, Superman was assigned a task to create a new headquarters for the DC Comics heroes and villains, okay. He is the project manager for this project, and he was assigned this task to create a headquarters as soon as possible, okay, and to create all the IT infrastructure concerning this headquarter, okay. So as we all know that Superman is not an IT tech, so he goes to his friend Batman and asks him to help him in this task, okay. So his only constraint, or his only condition, okay, is to finish this IT infrastructure as soon as possible, maximum in 3 days or less. So Batman, he is only working alone. He is the only one in the DC Comics heroes that knows in the IT, okay. So he was assigned this task. So he was making his plan to create a new domain, which it will be called DC domain.local, and he was given by Superman 53 PC, okay. So that all of the DC Comics members, okay, heroes and villains, will use this 53 PC, okay. Another information from the previous video, we have 215 characters, okay. These are all the DC Comics heroes and villains. We will all deal with their real names in the Active Directory, okay. So the number of PCs is not as the number of the DC Comics members, but due to a budget constraint, Superman tell Batman that he can only provide him with 53 PCs and 53 robots, okay. So Batman planned to create the Active Directory, the new Active Directory for the DC Comics heroes, and he will call it DC domains.local. He will use PowerShell scripts to accomplish this task in the least amount of time, and he will also use the solution of WDS and MDT combined together with ADK. The WDS, it's abbreviation of Windows Deployment Server, and the MDT is an abbreviation of Microsoft Deployment Tool, and ADK I don't know actually, but Batman will use the Windows Deployment Server and Microsoft Deployment Tool to deploy Windows and Office and all of the necessary programs associated with the Windows on the 53 PCs in the least amount of time. So in the previous video we were saying that this is the just a minute. So let's continue our lab now. As I said before, here is a brief about what we have been discussing the last video or the previous video. As I said before, it's DC Comics universe. We have a new headquarters. Superman was assigned as a project manager to construct a new headquarters, okay, for the DC Comics villains and heroes. Superman asked Batman to be responsible for deploying and configuring a new domain, which we will call it DC domain.local, that will contain 215 active directory user accounts, okay, which are all the real character names for all of the DC Comics villains and heroes. And we have 53 computers and 53 robots in the process, and we will use the WDS and MDT tool to deploy these 53 computers with the operating system Windows, with all of its accessories like Office, Adobe Reader, all of this, through using two features: Windows deployment server role combined with Microsoft deployment tool. Okay, this is the part for deploying the PCs. Okay, we will use these two methods combined. And as for the Active Directory, we will use the PowerShell scripts to increase or to accelerate the process of creating them. Okay, the main constraint for this lab is the time. You need to construct the Active Directory and deploy the PCs in the least amount of time, minimum 2 days. Okay, so we need to be very efficient and very accurate and very fast. Okay, so in the previous video we have said that this is our scenario. We need to construct two domain controllers, which each of them having two network cards, and a network teaming will be done between them. This has been discussed in the previous video, so here today we will begin following our scenario. As I said before, our hypervisor, or the program that we will use to begin creating our lab, which will be, or the software that we'll use to create our virtual machines, will be the Hyper-V. Okay, the way to install the Hyper-V as a program, or the way that we can have the Hyper-V as a software like the VM Workstation Pro. Here we can see that VM Workstation Pro is the software. You just need to install it, okay, and then you can begin creating virtual machines. As for the Hyper-V, to install the Hyper-V in your machine, you need to open the start menu and then go to the control panel, and then you'll go to the add programs and features, and then we'll go to turn off features or on. Okay, and then we will check this option, Hyper-V. We will check this. Okay, and after we check this, the computer or the laptop or the workstation that we will use, or the host that will this Hyper-V will be installed on, will need to be restarted. Okay, so this is the way that how we can install the Hyper-V. Okay, and after we install the Hyper-V, we will have this this is the shape of the software. Just a minute, because as I said before, I have already recorded the videos before, but it was without sound, so I will begin commenting on these sounds by English and Arabic. So just a minute. The MDT lab, and then it is video number 1. Okay, and then here we can see, just a minute, we can see here that after installing the Hyper-V, we will have this software interface, or this is the interface for the Hyper-V. As we can see, there is a couple of options. Okay, but before knowing how the Hyper-V, how we can create a virtual machine and how we can configure it, how we can create a virtual machine and configure it with the how we can configure a lot of things in it, we need first to discuss a little bit of, or some concepts that should be discussed before begin working with the Hyper-V. As we all know, the Hyper-V has something like this. Let me show you. The Hyper-V have 3 types of switches. Okay, let's first, we have something called, there is 3 options. It will called external virtual switch, internal virtual switch, and private virtual switch. Okay, what is this kind, or what are these 3 types? Okay, let's have a little bit of a diagram here first to just discuss it. Okay, let's discuss here. First of all, this is a switch. Okay, we have three types of switches, but this is a switch. We will begin after that discussing each type of switch one by one. And this is switch we have here, computer 1 or server 1, and then server 2, okay, and then server or workstation like here. Okay, let's type it here. For example, here is server, or let's say for example this will be our first domain controller. Let's type it here. It's DC01. This will be our first domain controller, okay, and then here it goes. And then we have a second domain controller. As the scenario will say, we have in our scenario two domain controllers, okay, and then this will be a normal workstation, so like PC1 for example, PC01, and this is a switch, okay. All of these, the server, okay, and the workstation and the second server, all of this or all of these computers and servers will be connected to this switch. Why we connected to this switch? So all of them can be able to communicate with each other, okay. So for example, this is the first type of switch, okay. It's called Hyper-V internal switch. Okay, so what is an internal Hyper-V? This is the first type of switches that we have in Hyper-V. What is the Hyper-V internal switch? This is a switch that computers and servers are connected to it, so they can be able to communicate with each other. It's something like they are grouping. This switch is grouping all of them in one group, or let's like grouping them, or the switch function is to let them all of them communicate with each other, okay. And this switch should have an IP address. For example, we will have here in this lab 0.0.1.0, okay. So this is the network, okay, that all of these servers and workstation will be in, okay. For example, this server, maybe it will have 10.0.0.20, and this will have 10.0.0.21, okay, and this PC will be in the same range, okay. So the first type of Hyper-V switch, it's internal switch. Its function is to enable servers and workstation to communicate with each other. What is the meaning by they can communicate with each other? For example, they can share documents between them. They can you can control, or you can get remote access to any one of them, okay. This is the basic function of Hyper-V internal switch. The Hyper-V internal switch, it's a switch that will enable servers and workstation to communicate with each other, and they should be in the same network range, so we can be able to communicate with each other. So to have an internal switch, you have to have two things. First of all of the workstations and servers should be connected to this switch, and they should be in the same range. So this is the first type of Hyper-V switches, which is called internal switch, okay. We can see that here in this we have something like here. Let's have the discussion. Sorry, we have the type of switch. A Hyper-V switch is an internal switch, allows communication between virtual adapters connected to virtual machines and management operating system, okay. Let's have it here a little bit more advanced drawing. Here we can see that this is your laptop, okay, or this is the Hyper-V host, or this is the workstation or laptop that you will have Hyper-V software installed on it, and this is the network card that it is attached to the motherboard of this host that you will have Hyper-V software installed on it. So after installing the Hyper-V software or program, it will create a virtual switch, okay, that will use this physical adapter or the adapter of the Hyper-V host, okay, to create virtual adapters. Here we have 1 2 3 4 5 6. These are virtual adapters, okay, and something called Management OS virtual adapter. Let's have it from another way, okay. This is your laptop, okay, and you have installed Hyper-V software on it, okay, and this laptop has a network card, okay. So how we can use this network card to connect to it, or to make a lot of virtual machines connect to it through this one physical adapter, okay. We have only one physical adapter, and every virtual machine need to have a network adapter to connect to the internet, or so it can be able to communicate with the other virtual machines. So we have only one adapter. What the Hyper-V software does, it will create a virtual switch, and then it will have ports on it. For example, a lot of ports, or you can have unlimited ports. So these ports, you can connect to it virtual machines with virtual adapters, okay. So we have 1 2 3 4 5 6, and this virtual switch will have something called Management OS virtual adapter. This adapter will enable you to communicate with all of the virtual machines. For example, if you connect a virtual machine, you have 1 2 3 4 5, sorry, you connect or created 4 virtual machines connected to these 4 ports on the switch. So how you can enable the host to communicate with all of these guest machines or these virtual machines through the Management OS virtual adapter, okay. So this is simply this graph, what it says, okay, that you have a laptop that has a network card, and you install the Hyper-V software, as I said from a couple of minutes, on this laptop, okay, and then after you install the Hyper-V software, it will install, or it will create a Hyper-V virtual switch, okay, which will have virtual ports on it, okay. So you can put on these virtual ports or connect to these virtual ports virtual machines, okay. 1 2 3 4 5, and each virtual machine will have a virtual network adapter. So we have two parts. We will create a virtual switch with virtual ports, and then when you create a virtual machine, you will create with a virtual machine a virtual network adapter. So we have, for example, 1 2 3 4, we have 4 virtual machines with 4 virtual adapters connected to 4 virtual ports, okay. And the last port, okay, it's called Management OS virtual adapter or port. This port enables the laptop to communicate, or the host to communicate, with the 4 virtual machines. In this case, we call a virtual machine a guest, okay, and the laptop or the physical machine that it is that the Hyper-V software is installed on it, we call it a host. So a host, it is the laptop or the PC or the workstation that the Hyper-V software is installed on it, and the guest, it is the virtual machine that it is installed on the Hyper-V software, okay. So again, what we mean by guest, it is a virtual machine created on the laptop through the Hyper-V software, okay. The laptop itself, it is called a host. A virtual machine, it's called the guest. So to enable the laptop to communicate with the virtual machine that you have created on the Hyper-V software, you need to have the Management OS virtual adapter or the Management OS virtual port created on the switch, okay, the virtual switch, so you can be able to communicate from the laptop with the virtual machine. Why do I need to communicate my laptop to the virtual machine? For example, you need to share some documents between your laptop and your virtual machine. This can be done through this Management OS virtual adapter, okay. So the first type, it is called internal virtual switch, okay. This is the first type, okay. What about the second type? We have second type, it's called external virtual switch, okay. So here, the second type, we will change this, or we will add another thing. Here we can say that here we will have, for example, internet. Here we have internet. Sorry, I need to type it. here internet. Okay, and then this will call, there is the second type which is called, I think we can remove this. So here we will type Hyper-V external switch. Okay, this is the second type of switches. Okay, it's called Hyper-V external switch. What is the difference between the Hyper-V internal switch and the Hyper-V external switch? Hyper-V internal switch, you don't have access to the internet. Okay, as for the external switch, you have access to the internet. Okay, so how this Hyper-V external switch works? It will work with a technology called NAT. Okay, let's remove, or let consider this. What it will do, for example, you have here, as I said before, our network, it's 10.0.0, say 10.0.1 or .0.0. Okay, this is your network. Okay, so to get to the internet, you need to go to the internet. You have to have something called a real IP. A real IP, it's something like 61 dot whatsoever, what, like this. Okay, what is a real IP? Real IP, it's an IP on the internet that it's a unique IP. Okay, you can, to surf the internet, you need to go to websites, and to able to surf the internet and to communicate with websites and everything, you need to have a unique number. This unique number is called real IP. Okay, as for these IPs, for example 10.0.20 and 10.0.0.21, this is called private IPs. These IPs can be repeated in any network. For example, if you have a company A, company A can have this range, and company B, for example, can have the same range, so it can be repeated without a problem, because these IPs will not get to the internet. You are connecting internally only. Okay, and also this is for company A and company B. But what if you need to access the internet? Company A need to access the internet, its IP address should be unique. Okay, and if company B needs to access the internet, it also should have a real IP, a unique real IP, so they can go to the internet and communicate with the other websites, and even they can communicate with each other. For example, if you need company A to communicate with company B, so every company should have a real IP address, so they can be able to communicate with each other through the internet. So real IP, if you want to communicate with another company, for example, if your company is in Egypt and another company is in England, and you want them to communicate with each other through the internet, so everyone or every company should have a real IP address. Okay, so they have to so they can communicate with each other. But what if you need only the PCs to communicate with each other in each company internally? So you can use something called private addresses, which is like 10.0.0, 10.0.21. so you can use the private range or the private IP addresses in company A, and you can repeat them or use the same ranges in company B, as long as they are communicating internally and not getting to the internet. Okay, so this is the Hyper-V internal switch. External switch, Hyper-V internal switch, you can't get to the internet. As for external switch, you can get to the internet. Okay, so how this external switch works, works with something called NAT. What is NAT? For example, if you want this domain controller to get to the internet, he will talk to the switch, and then the switch will change his IP address from 10.0.0.21 to another range. For example, here we can see it will change his IP from private to a public IP address, so it can access the internet. Okay, so there is another thing. Can domain controller 1 and PC1 and domain controller 2, all of them can access the internet with one real IP address? It can, through something called NATing. Okay, you can configure the external switch to use the NAT, so every PC or domain controller or server, if it wants to access the internet, it will talk to the switch which has the NAT the NAT option installed on it. Okay, it will in some way will let it go to the internet by using one IP address only. So all of them if you want to know the real IP address, as I said before, any PC, if it wants to access the internet, it should have a real IP address and a unique one. So if all of them is going to the internet, they will have the same real IP address. So can one ask me, okay, you said that this IP address should not be repeated. Okay, as long as you are not using the NAT process, okay, they can't get the same IP address. But if you use the NAT process, you can have 10 or 20 or whatsoever number you need to get to the internet with one real IP address. Okay, I will not discuss what NAT is, how this can be done, but to know the differences between an external switch and internal switch. External switch, you can get to the internet, okay, but for an internal switch you can't get to the internet. This is the difference between a Hyper-V external switch and a Hyper-V internal switch. And the Hyper-V external switch use the process or a process called NAT, so you can be able to have a lot of PCs that can access the internet with one real IP address. Okay, so this as I said before, to access the internet you need to have a real IP address and a unique one. So this process of netting enables you to have a lot of PCs to get to the internet with one real IP address, and this will not make a conflict, or this will not make any problems on the internet. Okay, you should use the NAT. If someone knows this, you should Google it and see how this works. Okay, so we have Hyper-V internal switch, which is only to let PCs and workstation communicates internally. External switch, PCs can communicate between each other, plus that they can get to the internet. Okay, so which means that it is combined. You can let these PCs communicate with each other like an internal switch, and plus it can get to the internet. But as for internal switch, it's only made or designed to let PCs communicate with each other in the same network, but not be able to access the internet. So this is the Hyper-V external switch and Hyper-V internal switch. Okay, and another thing, in this diagram, let's get here, or let's go to this diagram. Also on this diagram you have a port called Management OS Operating OS Management OS Virtual Adapter. In the external switch you can make the host to be able to communicate with the virtual machines, or the host can be able to communicate with the guest in the external switch. The same as the internal switch, you have a port that will enable your host to communicate with the guest. So this is two things common between an internal switch and external switch. Internal switch and external switch, they have management ports that will enable the host to communicate with the guest. This is number one. Number two, in the external switch you can enable workstations and PCs to communicate with each other and get to the internet. But for the internal switch you can only enable the workstations and servers to communicate with each other, but not to access the internet. This is an external switch and internal switch. What about a private switch? A private switch, it's like the internal switch. It enables PCs and workstation to communicate with each other. Okay, but you can't make the host communicate with the virtual machines. Okay, this is very critical. Here in internal switch, virtual machines can communicate with each other and can communicate with the host, or the virtual machines, what is called guest. The guest can communicate with the host through the management OS port in internal switch and external switch. But in the private switch, only virtual machines can communicate with each other, but it can't communicate with the host, or the guest cannot communicate with the host. Let's say that once more. The laptop, or the physical laptop, or the server, the laptop or the machine that have Hyper-V software installed on it, we will call it a host. And the virtual machine that will be created on the Hyper-V software, it will be called a guest. So to enable the guest to communicate with the host, you need to communicate through something in the virtual switch called Management OS Virtual Adapter. So this is in both external switch and internal switch. As for the private switch, you don't have this port or management port, so the guest can communicate with each other, but it will not be able to communicate with the host. Okay, why do we need the guest to communicate with the host in the first place? we need to share some documents, we need to share some scripts, some whatsoever. So this is the three types of switches that the Hyper-V software uses. So if you need to create virtual machines on the Hyper-V software, first of all, this is the interface. Before creating the virtual machine from new here, to create a virtual machine, you need to decide which type of network or which type of switch you need. You need an internal switch, so you don't need internet access, and you need the guest to communicate with each other and with the host, so you need an internal switch, or you need the guest to communicate with the host, okay, and to get to the internet, so you need an external virtual switch, or you need only the virtual machines to communicate with each other but not to connect or not to communicate with the host. You need to decide, okay, before doing this. Okay, I have decided to use an internal switch. In our lab we will use an internal switch. We don't need the virtual machines to get to the internet. So how we can do this? It will be done simply by doing this. Just a minute. Okay, we will see. I will show you all how this is done. We will go, sorry, not go to back, cancel. Here we will go to virtual switch. Okay, just here we can pass this also. Just a minute. Just a minute, we can go there. Okay. No, I need to do something else. Just a minute. No, just again back. Okay, just a minute. Let's go there. How we can create a switch? First of all, here is our Hyper-V software. We don't have any switches. We will go to virtual switch manager, and then I will show you how this can be done. We will go to virtual. Sorry, just a minute. We'll go to just a minute. Okay, so here we will go to the virtual switch manager, and then we will tell him to create a switch, and then we will define which switch we need. I can show you all from here. Okay, we will go to the here we will go to the switch manager, virtual switch manager, and click on it, and then we will get this window. It will tell us new virtual switch, and then you can choose which one of them you need. For example, if you need external or internal or private, okay, you will need any one of them. Okay, it will tell you which type you need. So in this lab we will tell him new virtual network switch, and we tell him we need an internal one. Okay, and that's it. Okay, and that's it. If you need to create an external switch, you can tell him external switch and tell him private switch, but here there is something I need to tell you all. When you create an external switch, as I said before, there is the external switch use the NAT process to let all of these workstations access to internet. Okay, but there is another thing we need to take note. Let's put it here in another thing, or let me show you all from the diagram. Okay, let's go back. Okay, here. Okay, if you need, when you create an external switch, as I said before, it will use the NAT process to access to let all of the virtual machines access the internet. But let's see here the diagram. Okay, again here. So here, if we have 4 virtual machines and they want to access the internet, we will go to the switch, and then the switch will get them to the router. Here we can consider this a router. It will get out to the internet, okay, through using the NAT process. But what about the host. These are the guests. What about the host? How can he access the internet? Okay, when you create an external virtual switch, the Hyper-V software creates a virtual router, okay, a virtual router, okay, and then it lets all of these virtual machines connect or to get to internet through this virtual router. Even also the host, yani the guest and the host, will connect to the internet using the virtual router that the Hyper-V software has created. Okay, so for example, this virtual machine wants to go to the internet. It will go, or it will be connected to the switch, and then the switch will go to the virtual router, and the virtual router will get it to the real router, or it will forward it to the real router, which will get to the internet. The same as for your host. This is for the guest, that is before the virtual machine. As for the host or the laptop, it will connect to the virtual router of the Hyper-V software, and the virtual router or Hyper-V software will connect you to the real router, which will get you to the internet. This is simply, maybe it's not the process in exact, but this is what it will do. Okay, so what we need to create here in this lab, we need to create an internal switch. Okay, so in our lab we will create, just pause it because I have already created it. Okay, we will create, okay, in this video I didn't show you how I can create a virtual, because I didn't record how to create a virtual switch, but I have shown you all through the screenshots and documentation how to create an internal switch. So after creating an internal switch, we will create a virtual machine, tell him next, and then we will give this machine a name. Here we are creating our first domain controller, so we will name it DC01. Okay, and then we will tell him, just a minute, we need this virtual machine to be generation 1. Okay, it says that virtual machine support 32-bit and 64-bit operating system and provides virtual machine that's been here. This generation 1 supports 32-bit and 64-bit operating system. As for generation 2, it supports the UEFI based firmware. Okay, this is a newly boot system. It's called UEFI. We've been working before with something called master boot, okay, or something called boot record, I think, and this is UEFI, or sorry, legacy boot and UEFI based boot. Okay, so these are two different operating system. Anyway, booting system. Anyway, we will use the generation 1 because most of our operating system are using this generation. If you have for example an operating system that can supports the UEFI based system, you can use it. Okay, but I will use generation 1 anyway. The differences between them that this doesn't support UEFI based boot system. Okay, كده. So the virtual machine supports newer virtualization features like UEFI based firmware and requires support 64-bit, so it doesn't support 32-bit. So you have Windows 32-bit, you can use generation 1 virtual machine to install or to create this virtual machine on it. But if you don't have 32-bit, you have 64-bit, so you can use the second one. Okay, and I prefer the second one. If you have operating system, for example Windows 10 64-bit, you can use the second generation. Okay, but if you have Windows 10 for example, or Windows Server 32-bit, you can use the first generation. Okay, so now we will use the first generation, and then we will give him 2 giga of RAM. Okay, what if this one use dynamic memory for this virtual machine? You have assigned 2 gigabyte for this virtual machine, but what about if it needs more than 2 gigabyte? So if you didn't check this option, it will stop. If for example, if it needs, for example, it have finished using this 2 gigabyte and it needs another additional 1 giga, it will not, unless if you check this one, it will not use, or it will not get another 1 gigabyte. But if you use this dynamic memory, it will go and get its 1 gigabyte automatically without your interference. Okay, for example, if you have your host has 8 gigabytes and you have assigned for this virtual machine 2 gigabyte and you checked this dynamic memory, when the virtual machine reaches its limit and it used all of its 2 gigabyte, it will automatically takes from the left from the 8 gigabyte, now it will be 6. It will take 1 gigabyte and increase it, if for example if you need 1 gigabyte more. Okay, so dynamic memory, it means it will take more memory, okay, if there is available memory, if the virtual machine needs more memory. For example, if the virtual machine used all of its virtual memory, okay, and it needs more, and there is more left, or there is additional memory left, okay, from your host machine, it will take from it. Okay, we will see that in a moment, but just take care if you create any virtual machine to use this dynamic memory. If you have a lot of memory, for example, if you have more memory, you can choose this option, but if you have limited memory, so you do not need to check this one. Okay, so here we will tell him next, and then here in this it will ask you your network adapter will be connected to which switch. Okay, we have created an internal switch in our lab. Here we create an internal switch and name it DC internal switch. Internal switch means that our workstations and servers will be able to communicate with each other, but they will not get to the internet. Okay, next, and then it's asks here about the size of the hard disk of this virtual machine. We will give it 100, I think, 70 gigabyte. You can give it 100, I prefer it 150 also. And then he is telling us to put the ISO image or the DVD that contains the Windows system. Here I'm telling him that I will not put this ISO image now. I will install operating system later. I will not put the ISO image now that contains the Windows image, the Windows software or the Windows operating system. So tell him next, and then finish. So now we have created our first virtual machine. We will go to the setting, okay, and then we will go to the DVD drive and tell him to use the Windows Server 2019 ISO image, or the image that contains, or the ISO image or the DVD that contains the Windows Server 2019 operating system. Okay, so now after putting the DVD, we will tell him connect, and then from the button of power we will click here, so it will start the virtual machine. Just a moment, let's see how much time we have. Okay, so I will go quickly. So now we can speed up the process a little bit. Just a minute. Here we will accept the license agreement, and then we tell him custom installation. We have 70 gigabyte. We will make two partitions. The operating system will be on the C drive, which is 60 gigabyte, and then we will have another partition. It will be for the data or for the documents or whatsoever for this server, and we will have it as the rest of it, which will be 10 gigabyte. So we have two partitions, C and D. C for the operating system, D for the data. Okay, tell him to install it on the 60 gigabyte. So now it will be installed. Okay, and then we will click on the setting of this virtual machine, and then we will enable something from the integration services, which is called guest services. By enabling this service, we can ease the communication between the host and the guest. As I said before, the host is the laptop and the guest is the virtual machine. Why we need to communicate the host with the virtual machine, or the guest with the host? Through using this guest service in integration services. For example, I need to share something from my host to my guest, a document, a script, whatsoever, between the laptop and the virtual machine. So you can make this work by checking the guest services. So every virtual machine you create, you need to make sure in the integration services it should have the guest services checked through the setting of this virtual machine. Right click or setting, or from here right click the virtual machine and then setting, or setting from this here and then go to integration services and click on guest services. Okay, so now we will have our installation. It's Windows Server with Windows Data Center, okay, 2000 Windows Data Center Server 2019. This is the version. As here we can see a little bit of, this is the name of the virtual machine, the state it is running, it's not off or it's running, I mean it's on and running, and the CPU usage, how much CPU you are using, the virtual machine, the RAM, how much RAM you are using, the uptime, how much time this virtual machine is up and running, and this is the software Hyper-V version, because the Hyper-V have versions. The Hyper-V software it's 8.3. okay, so here are some data or some statistics about this virtual machine, and then we have here some tabs. It's summary. Here in the summary we can see that when this virtual machine was created, what is the version of the Hyper-V, what is the generation of this virtual machine. We have said this when, or we have done this when creating the virtual machine. Notes, we don't have notes. Clustered, no. Heartbeat, no. Contact, okay. And here another tab for the memory, okay, which will contain the memory status, how much memory we are using, and then the networking, it will give us the MAC address of the network card, and if there is any IP address that has been put or has been attached to this network card. For example, we will set up the Windows server, we will go and give the network card an IP address, okay, so it will appear in this tab. So let's complete. So now we have, here we can see, for example, that in this network tab we can see this is the MAC address of our network adapter, the switch that it is connected to it, the name of the switch. As we said before, we will have an internal switch. If this network adapter has an IP address, still we didn't give it still an IP address, but after installation of the Windows we will give it an IP address, okay. That means that this network card is up and running, okay. You can aim full screen to get it full screen. The first thing to do when you install a Windows server or installing any Windows, you need to when you install the Windows, there is a username or a default username which is called administrator. You need to give a password to this default user or default administrator account, and it is preferred after you give it a strong password, you change the name of this default user account from administrator to any other name, and it is also preferable that you disable it and make another user with the same privileges, okay, of a local administrator. This is the default username that it is created when you install the Windows, any Windows operating system. It will have a user account, local user account, which is called administrator. It has full privileges on the Windows system, okay. you should give it a strong password, okay, and then after you give it a strong password you need to rename it from administrator to any other name, and the best practice is to disable this account as a whole and create a new account with any name except of administrator, of course, and give it the privileges of the administrator, because the administrator has full privileges on the Windows system. So you need to create another account, give it a different name than administrator, give it a strong password, and put it in the administrator group in the local administrator groups in the local groups in the Windows operating system. This as long as you are working in a work group, not in a domain, okay. In a domain this is another different situation, okay. So now we have already created the, just a minute here, this icon, it means like Control Alt Delete. It's simulating what you do when you click Control Alt Delete. It opens the login screen but with one icon, okay. Here we can have a look. Here, power, this is the power option. When you click on it, it will power on the virtual machine. This is the stop and pause, and I think this is the stop and the pause. Sorry, this will power on, this Control Alt Delete, and this will power on the virtual machine. This stop, it will stop the virtual machine, and power, this will shut down the virtual machine. I mean by shut down, look, not like power down. Shut down means it will make a shutdown to the system. For example, if you want to shut down the Windows, you will go to the start and then shut down. This icon does the same. It simulates a shutdown process, okay, a legal shutdown process, okay. And then as for this, it will pause the virtual machine, okay. Pause means it puts it in a standby status, okay. So this is the main. Stop it, it's like freezing it, okay. This is, it will put it in standby status. This will shut down the machine. Stop, it will make it freeze, or let's make it like hibernate. If you know the hibernate option in Windows, this is like hibernate. As for this first option, this, it will power on the virtual machine if it's powered off, okay. It's not like shut down. It means power off here or power on. It's like unplugging the power cable of the machine, for example. It's forcing shutdown by plugging off the power cable, okay. This is exactly what you do if you try to power off the virtual machine from this icon and not this icon, okay. So here, before we will put our password, here we are preparing this virtual machine to be a domain controller. First of all, we need to change its name and to activate some options in it, okay. And then we need to have 2 network cards on it and make a team. As I said before, teaming a network card, it is a very good process. It's what I mean by teaming 2 network cards. When you team 2 network cards, they will act as one. So what is the double benefit of this? When any one of them, for example, you have 2 acting as one, for example, and then one of these 2 has a corruption, or it is faulty, or it's not working, then your network connection will not be down. Still the other one will complete the process, and your network connection with your servers and workstations, if this is acting as domain controller, will not be down. So imagine that you have only one network card and this network card is down, so your all connection with all of your servers and workstations will be down. But if you have 2 and the 2 is acting as one, and then one of them is down, then your network connection will not be down, because the other network card will work and complete the process. I need just to have a little bit. Can you hold for a minute? So let's continue our lab. Here we will log into the domain controller, or what will be a domain controller, and then we need to do a couple of things. We need to change its name to DCDC01 and to enable some options. We can make it a little bit faster. Here we go. First of all, This is the first login. Okay, I need, for example, to have this PC on my desktop and need to have the control panel here also, so I can ease my access to different Windows setting. Okay, so here I'll open the PC setting. I think just a minute here again. I'll login and then just a minute, no, again back, again back, just a minute. I will log in, okay, for the first time. We will have it as a full screen. So now here we can see that we will open the server manager, okay, and then we will go to manage, okay, and then server manager options. By the way, when you install Windows Server for the first time, the server manager opens automatically every time you log in to the Windows Server system, okay, or Windows Server 2019 system. So I don't need this server manager window to appear automatically every time I log in to the server. So I will tell him do not start server manager automatically. I will I will start it by myself manually, okay, because this takes some bit of the RAM, and the RAM is a little bit limited. This server has only 2 GB of RAM, okay. And then we will right click and then personalize, and then we will have this PC and the control panel and the network to be on the desktop, just to ease my access to different setting of the Windows, and to access also my hard disk and other things, hard disk of the server. So here we'll go to local server. Here we can change the setting or the Windows setting of the server, for example the server name and some other setting we need to change, so to prepare this server or this virtual machine to be a domain controller and to set up Active Directory on it. Here we will go to the themes, okay, and then go to desktop settings, so we can make this PC and control panel and network icons to appear on the desktop, so I can able to access the Windows setting with ease, to access the hard disk of the server, to access the control panel. Here the first thing we need to do when you install Windows Server 2019 and you are preparing this server to be a domain controller, you need to open the remote desktop option. This option enables you to remotely access this server from any other machine. If this option is not enabled, you will not be able to access the server from any other machine, okay. For example, if this server is in the data center, or you have in a remote place and you are working from your office and you need to access from your office the server, and this remote desktop option is not enabled, you will not be able to access the server. So you need to enable it, okay, and we will see how we can enable it. Here we have Windows Server 2019 Data Center. Here we will tell him allow remote connection, so we can be able to, and also there is another thing, just we can get a little bit back. Here when we tell him allow, here we can see that allow connections only from computers running remote desktop with network level authentication. Here that means that he will not enable you to connect remotely to this server unless it is authenticated, or it's a user that have a username and a password, and this username and the password, you have enabled this username and password to access this server. From here, from a setting on this server, you can tell him, for example, I need user A with the name of, for example, Kera Off, and the password blah blah blah. I need this user to be able to access this server remotely. Okay, this is called remote. In a group, it's called remote users. Okay, there is a group here on the server called this server, it's called remote users. You need to put in this group the users that you will enable them to access the server remotely from outside. Okay, this option is very important, because if you uncheck it, then anyone with any password and any username will able to access your server. You need it to be controlled, so you need to define which user will have access to this server remotely through putting this user in the remote users group on this server. This is the built-in group on the server. This is in case that you have a work group, not a domain. We will throw this in a domain. It's different case, but in a domain you need to make sure that also you have enabled the Active Directory user to access this server also through another process, but the same. You need to have a username, a password, and you have this password and username enabled to access this server remotely. So we need to check this option, and then we will change the name to be DC01. We said DC is the abbreviation of DC Comics, and DC it's for domain controller 01. Okay, so now we will restart the server. Okay, we can restart it later. And then we need, here we can see that we have only one network card, so we need to add another network card. Okay, and make a team between them. And the option for teaming, as I said before, is to make a network redundance. So if one of the network cards is down, then the other network card will complete the process, and it will not make the network connection down. Here we can see desktop setting, icon setting from themes, and then we can check these options. So we have all of our this PC and network and control panel appears on the desktop. So here we right click and tell him to restart the server, and then continue. Here I can see something like here. I said before, guys, if you need to know more about, or you need to revise what is an external virtual switch and the internal virtual switch, and private virtual switch, you can get to this this website. It explains, it's very good, and I will try to make it as a PDF. Okay, and put it in my in a Google Drive link. It will be in the description section under my video. Okay, so I put this documentation, and here you can see that it have a very good diagram explaining every switch, how does it works, and what are the types. For example, here I will show you the explanation of type of switches. Here we can see that a private switch allows communication between virtual adapters connected to virtual machines, only between the guests. So virtual machines can communicate with each other, but it will not communicate with the host, which is the laptop. Internal switch, the guests can communicate with each other, and also can communicate with the host, which is the laptop. External, but we don't have internet. External switch, the same as internal switch, but additionally they can access the internet. Okay, here we can say the private and internal have difference as for the presence or absence of virtual adapter for management. As I said before, in the private you will not be able from a laptop to communicate with your virtual machines. Only virtual machines can communicate with each other, or guests can communicate with each other, but cannot communicate with the host. Okay, so I leave this later. So now we need to add another network adapter, and then we will make a team. Okay, between these two network adapters for network redundancy, as I said before, because if you have only one network card and it was down, your connection of your workstations and servers to your domain will be down. But if you have two, and two and you have teaming and one of them failed, the other one will work, and your network connection or your servers and workstations connections with the domain controller will not be down. How we can add another network adapter? We will right click, okay, and then setting. Here another thing I need to take a note here. When you shut down, now I have shut down my virtual machine. When you shut down the virtual machine for the first time, you can see there is something called merging process. Okay, this process takes a little bit of time, I think. So you don't power, if you power down the virtual machine, you have to wait for a couple of minutes until the merge in process finish, because if you try to open the virtual machine when this process is running, it will be very slow, and it will take a lot of time to open. What about this process? What it is a merge process? Well, I think this virtual machine, when it is up and running, its configuration and its files, it's not saved. Let's say it is in the RAM, okay, and when you shut down it begins to be saved to a hard disk. It's something like when you open a Word document and you begin working on a Word document and adding numbers, or an Excel sheet and adding numbers and files, and you didn't make save. So where is this numbers and figures are written? It is written in the RAM, okay, but when you click save, it goes from the RAM to the hard disk. It is something like this. It's called merging process. Anyway, we don't need to know what is a merging process, but you need to know if your workstation, or sorry, your virtual machine have this in status, you need to wait completely until this disappears, until it's okay, status okay, or disappears completely. Because if you try to open the virtual machine when this is running, or the merge process is running, it will be very slow and you will have a lot of problems. Okay, here we can see that we open setting, then add hardware, and then we will add a network adapter. Here we can see that the first network adapter is connected to the internal switch, so we'll add another adapter and also connect it to the same switch, okay, the internal switch. So now we have two network adapters connecting to the same switch. Here we will tell him what switch you need this network adapter to be connected to. We connect it to the same internal switch that we have our first network adapter connected to, and then after that we'll tell him apply and OK, and then we will go to the Windows and begin making the teaming. Okay, apply and OK. So I think we can connect it now. We can power on the virtual machine again, and then we go here and then access the server. Okay, and then we will now make the teaming. First of all, you remember we have two partitions. One is the C for the operating system and one is the D for the data. But remember, we have already created this second hard disk, or second drive or volume, but we didn't format it, so we need to format it so we can be able to access it. Okay, so right click and format. We'll format it as NTFS and we'll make it data, and then start, and then OK. So now it is already formatted, and then we will go to the server manager, and then we will make the network adapter teaming. Okay, open the server manager, see here couple for a moment. I think here it's not okay. I am working here. Okay, we'll open the server manager. Okay, and then we will have, just a minute, we will go to the local server. No, we can pass it real quickly. Just a minute, sorry. Here again. Okay, again we will go to the local server, server manager, local server, and then network teaming or NIC teaming, and then we can see here these two adapters. Here is another difference between the VM Workstation Pro and the Hyper-V. The speed of these network adapters in the VM Workstation Pro, it's 1 gigabyte only, but in the Hyper-V it's 10 gigabyte, but which is more. I don't know why, but when I work with the Hyper-V, work with the VM Workstation Pro, it gives the speed for the network adapters to be 1 gigabyte, not 10 gigabyte. So this is also to take a note. We will check these two and then tell him to team. Okay, and then add to team, and then we'll name it as network team DC team, and then we'll leave everything as it is, and then we tell him okay. So after that the teaming will be done, and then we can put our IP address for our server. Okay, for our domain controller. We are preparing this server to be a domain controller, so we needed to give it an IP address. Okay, so after the teaming we will make, or we will put an IP address on the server. Okay, first of all there will be something like a fault or an error, but you have to wait for a couple of seconds, just a minute, and then we can see it will be active. Okay, after a couple of seconds, you need to have 2 or 3 minutes. So now we have our server prepared. We have it the remote, or we can see we have the remote desktop enabled, the remote management enabled, the network teaming enabled. The next step, we will put an IP address. We have changed the name of the server, so the next step we will give it an IP address, and then we'll begin installation of the Active Directory and promote this server to be a domain controller. So until you see all you then next time, I hope this video was informative for you all, and would like you all to thank you for viewing. As for this documentation for how or what is the differences between the different Hyper-V switches, I will make it as a PDF. Here, let's print it as a PDF. Okay, and then we will print as a PDF, and then I will put it here in the AD collection tools in this DC domain. Okay, and we will put it here as Hyper-V switches type. I will put this the whole DC domain folder, which contains all of our scripts and documentation we will use through the whole lab. I will put it in a Google Drive link in the description section under the video. Okay, so now we are doing it. So I will not bother you all. Hope to see you all, or hope you enjoyed all the lab. I would like you all to thank you for viewing. Thank you.